When I confirmed that last transfer, I smiled. I actually smiled, sitting alone in my kitchen, because I thought we were finally starting our life together. I remember looking at the confirmation screen for almost a full minute, just staring at the numbers, like I could make them mean something different if I looked long enough. Today, I still ask myself how I let myself believe that love could fit inside a bank account number. I keep coming back to that smile. That's the part I can't forgive myself for.
When I confirmed that last transfer, I smiled. I actually smiled, sitting alone in my kitchen, because I thought we were finally starting our life together. I remember looking at the confirmation screen for almost a full minute, just staring at the numbers, like I could make them mean something different if I looked long enough. Today, I still ask myself how I let myself believe that love could fit inside a bank account number. I keep coming back to that smile. That's the part I can't forgive myself for. Loneliness that looked, she thought, a little bit like her own. She wrote back, "It doesn't sound strange. Thank you. What kind of engineering do you do?" What followed over the next 2 weeks was, in Sharon's words later, the most attentive conversation I'd had with anyone in years. Dennis wrote long messages, thoughtful, detailed, full of questions about her life. He asked about her garden, and remembered, days later, to ask how the tomatoes were doing. He asked about her children by name. He asked what her favorite old movie was, and when she said Casablanca, he sent her 3 paragraphs about the first time he'd seen it, dubbed into German, on a rainy Sunday with his late wife. He told her about his work, overseeing the assembly of components for a joint aerospace venture, splitting his time between a facility outside Istanbul and business trips across Europe. He said the work was demanding but meaningful. He said he'd spent so many years focused on his career that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to want to talk to someone at the end of the day. He never rushed her. He never said anything that felt inappropriate or forward. If anything, Sharon found herself wishing he would move a little faster, wishing the conversation would tip from careful and respectful into something warmer. It took 3 weeks before he called her beautiful. It took 5 weeks before he said, quietly, almost as an aside at the end of a long message, that he thought he might be falling for her. By then, Sharon had already stopped checking other profiles on the app. She had already started telling her daughter, in careful, half-joking tones, about this German engineer I've been talking to. "Have you video called him yet?" her daughter asked one Sunday, and Sharon had to admit she hadn't. "He's always in some secure facility," Sharon explained. "Cameras aren't allowed near the assembly lines. Security clearance stuff." Her daughter had gone quiet for a moment. "That's a little weird, Mom." "It's an aerospace facility, honey. It makes sense." At the time, it had made sense. Later, Sharon would replay that conversation more times than she could count. The first excuse came innocently enough. Dennis had promised, 6 weeks into their conversation, that he would finally call her. A real call, voice only, since video wasn't possible from the facility. The call never came. Instead, a message. "I am so sorry, my love. There was an emergency inspection today. I will call you tomorrow, I promise." Tomorrow came. Another excuse. A power outage at his apartment building. Then, 2 days later, a call that lasted only 90 seconds before the line supposedly dropped and never reconnected that night. When they finally did speak, his voice was warm, accented, gentle, exactly what Sharon had imagined. He apologized profusely. He said the facility's communication restrictions were more intense than he'd expected when he signed the contract. He said he hated it. He said the moment his contract ended, he was moving somewhere with normal internet and normal rules, and he wanted that somewhere to be near her. Sharon believed him. Why wouldn't she? His voice matched his photos. His apologies felt genuine. And more than anything, she wanted to believe him. Because the alternative, that this was all constructed, that none of it was real, was too painful to consider. Then came the second crack. Dennis mentioned, almost in passing, that his company was sending him to Ghana for 2 weeks to oversee equipment installation at a partner facility. He said it was a country he'd never visited, that the trip had been added to his schedule with almost no notice, that he wished he didn't have to go. Sharon thought nothing of it. Engineers traveled. That was simply the nature of the job. While he was supposedly in Ghana, the messages became less frequent, sometimes with gaps of a day or more. When they did come, Dennis explained the internet at the site was unreliable, that he was working 16-hour days, that he thought about her every night before falling asleep exhausted. Then, 10 days into the trip, a different kind of message arrived. Something happened today. I don't want to worry you, but I need to tell you because I don't want secrets between us. Sharon's heart had raced, reading those words. Dennis explained that his passport and travel documents had been stolen from his hotel room, along with a company laptop containing sensitive contract information. He said he'd already filed a police report. He said his company's compliance department was furious, that there would be an internal investigation, that he was terrified of what it might mean for his career. He didn't ask her for anything. Not yet. He simply told her he was scared and needed someone to talk to. Sharon stayed up until 2 a.m. that night, typing message after message of comfort and encouragement, telling him it would be okay, that he would figure it out, that she was there for him. It was the first time she had felt, in years, truly needed by someone. She had no idea that feeling was the entire point. In the weeks that followed the passport incident, something shifted in their relationship. The crisis had, paradoxically, brought them closer. Dennis began talking about the future in concrete terms. He said that once his contract ended, only a few months away now, he wanted to relocate to the United States. He said he'd already looked into visa requirements. He said he could see himself in Ohio, in a house with a garden, maybe even helping Sharon expand hers. He asked, one night, what her favorite flowers were. When she told him, sunflowers, he said he wanted to plant an entire row of them for her the first spring they were together. Sharon began, without quite realizing it, restructuring her mental image of her own future around a man she had never met in person. The account had $11 left in it. Sharon Mitchell stared at the screen, refreshing it twice, as if the number would somehow correct itself the third time. It didn't. 4 hours earlier, she had wired the last of her savings, $4,200, to a lawyer in Istanbul she had never met, for a man she had never met either, to release a shipping contract that did not exist. Her phone buzzed. A text. Something happened. I will explain everything. Please don't be angry with me. Then nothing. No call. No explanation. Just silence, stretching out for hours, then a full day, then 3. On the 4th day, a stranger called her. Not Dennis. A woman, calm and professional, who identified herself as a fraud investigator working with Sharon's bank. Mrs. Mitchell, the woman said, we need to talk about the 17 transfers you made over the last 5 months. Sharon's stomach dropped. Are you saying this is a scam? There was a pause on the line. I'm saying, the investigator said carefully, that we traced every single transfer, and none of them went where you think they went. Sharon gripped the counter. Then where did my money go? The investigator didn't answer right away, and that silence, that 2-second silence, would haunt Sharon for the rest of the year. But to understand how she got to that kitchen counter staring at $11, we have to go back. 8 months earlier. Before we go further, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and let us know in the comments which country you're watching from. 8 months before that phone call, Sharon Mitchell's life looked, from the outside, entirely ordinary. She was 59 years old. She lived in a small 2-bedroom house in Ohio, the same house she had shared with her husband for 26 years before their divorce 3 years earlier. The divorce hadn't been dramatic. There had been no affair, no explosive fight, just a slow erosion. 2 people who had built a life together and then, somewhere in their 50s, discovered they had built 2 separate lives that happened to share an address. Her children were grown. Her son lived 4 hours away in Chicago, working long hours at a logistics company, calling on Sundays if he remembered. Her daughter lived closer, 20 minutes away, but was raising 2 young children of her own and had little time for long conversations. Sharon worked as a billing coordinator for a regional healthcare provider. It was steady work. Not exciting, but steady. She had worked there for 14 years. She knew the names of everyone in her department, knew which vending machine ate your dollar bills, knew exactly how many minutes it took to walk from the parking lot to her desk if she left at 7:52 instead of 7:55. Her evenings were quiet. She had a garden she was proud of. Tomatoes, a small patch of sunflowers her granddaughter had helped her plant. She had a dog, an aging golden retriever named Biscuit, who slept most of the day and greeted her at the door with the same enthusiasm, whether she'd been gone 5 minutes or 5 hours. But underneath the routine, there was something Sharon rarely said out loud, not even to her daughter. She was lonely. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind of loneliness. The quiet kind. The kind that lives in the 2 extra minutes you spend making coffee for one instead of 2. The kind that shows up when you catch yourself narrating your day to an empty room out of habit, then stopping mid-sentence because there's no one there to hear it. She had tried dating, briefly, a year after the divorce. Coffee with a man from her church group. Dinner with someone her sister had set her up with. Neither had gone anywhere. She told herself she wasn't in a hurry. She told herself 59 wasn't old, that there was still time. But some nights, lying awake, she wondered if she had already had her chance at love, and missed it, and this, the garden, the dog, the Sunday phone calls, was simply what the rest of her life would look like. It was her daughter, of all people, who suggested she try an app. "Not like the young people's apps, Mom," she'd said, laughing. "There's ones for people our parents' age, serious ones. People looking for real relationships, not hookups." Sharon had laughed it off at first. But 3 weeks later, on a rainy Tuesday evening, after a particularly quiet dinner alone, she downloaded the app. She almost deleted it twice before finishing her profile. She uploaded 2 photos, one from her niece's wedding the previous summer, where she was laughing at something off-camera, and one of her in the garden, dirt on her hands, squinting into the sun. Under About Me, she wrote 3 sentences and deleted them 4 times, before settling on something simple. Divorced, mother of 2, grandmother of 2. I like gardening, old movies, and coffee that's too strong. Looking for someone to build something real with, even if we're starting later than we planned. She hit publish before she could talk herself out of it, put the phone face down on her nightstand, and told herself she wouldn't check it again that night. She checked it 4 times before falling asleep. The message came 6 days later. "I don't normally do this, but something about your smile in that garden photo made me stop scrolling. I hope that doesn't sound strange. I'm Dennis." His profile picture showed a man in his early 60s, silver-haired, wearing a navy blazer, standing in front of what looked like an aircraft hangar. His bio said he was an aerospace engineer, originally from Germany, currently working on an international contract in Turkey. widowed, no children, fluent in 3 languages. Sharon almost didn't respond. Something about a man who looked that put-together messaging her felt almost too good. But she looked at his photo again. There was something gentle in his eyes, she thought. Something that didn't match the polished suit and the impressive job title. A kind of tiredness. A kind of... She told her sister about him at a family dinner, describing him with a kind of glow her sister hadn't seen in her since before the divorce. She told her hairdresser. She mentioned him, carefully, to a co-worker, testing the words out loud. My boyfriend. She found herself, one Saturday afternoon, standing in a department store, running her fingers along a rack of dresses, imagining what she might wear the day Dennis finally landed in the United States. She didn't buy anything that day, but she went back the following week and did. She began, quietly, researching flights from Istanbul to Columbus, just to see what the trip would look like, just to picture it. She told her daughter, half joking but half serious, that she might need her to help pick out invitations. Someday, who knows? Her daughter didn't laugh that time. Mom, you've never even seen his face move. You've never heard him laugh in real time. Doesn't that worry you even a little? Sharon remembers feeling defensive, almost hurt by the question. People our age don't need to rush into things the way you all do, she told her daughter. We talk every day. I know him. She believed that completely in that moment. She had no way of knowing that Dennis, his photos, his voice on those brief calls, his backstory as a grieving widower and aerospace engineer, had been assembled months earlier by a criminal network operating out of a compound outside Accra, Guyana, using a combination of stolen photographs, AI-altered voice recordings, and a carefully rehearsed script designed specifically to work on women in their 50s and 60s who had recently gone through a divorce or loss. Sharon was not the only woman Dennis was talking to that month. She was one of 6. The first request for money came wrapped in guilt and reluctance, exactly the way it was designed to. Dennis explained that because his laptop and documents had been stolen, he'd been temporarily locked out of his primary bank account while the company's security team investigated the breach. He said it was standard protocol, that it would resolve within 2 weeks, that he was deeply embarrassed to even be having this conversation with her. He said he needed $380 to cover a replacement visa document fee required by the facility before he could be reissued travel credentials. He said he would pay her back the moment his account was unlocked. He said he hated asking. He said if there was any other way, he would take it. Sharon sent the money that same night. It felt, she would say later, less like being asked for money and more like being trusted with something important. He had let her in on something vulnerable. He needed her. And for a woman who had spent 3 years feeling increasingly invisible, that need felt like intimacy. 2 days later, Dennis sent her a message full of gratitude, along with a photo, a selfie, him holding what appeared to be an official-looking document with a stamp, smiling with visible relief. That photo, generated and shared from a shared folder of manufactured proof images used across the scam network's dozens of active targets, would become one of the last pieces of evidence Sharon would ever receive of Dennis's existence. The second request came 12 days later, $650 for a customs fee to release the replacement laptop. The third, 3 weeks after that, $100 for a processing fee tied to reopening his frozen bank account. Each time, the amount grew. Each time, the explanation grew more elaborate, more specific, more woven into a narrative Sharon had spent months building in her mind. A narrative where she wasn't just sending money to a stranger, but investing, carefully and lovingly, in the man she was going to spend the rest of her life with. What made it impossible for Sharon to stop, even as the amounts grew, wasn't just the requests. It was what came after them. After the third payment, Dennis sent a flight confirmation, a real-looking booking reference for a flight from Istanbul to Columbus, dated 6 weeks out. Sharon stared at that confirmation for nearly an hour, her heart pounding, imagining herself standing at the arrivals gate. She showed the confirmation to her daughter. "See," she said, "he's coming. This proves it." Her daughter looked at the document for a long moment before saying quietly, "Mom, anyone can make something that looks like this." Sharon had brushed the comment off, but that night, alone, she looked at the confirmation again, and for the first time allowed herself 30 seconds of doubt before pushing it away entirely. 6 weeks later, the flight didn't happen. Dennis explained, devastated, that his account had been frozen again, this time by an automated compliance flag triggered by unusual international activity, a direct consequence, he said, of the earlier passport theft. He said he needed $2,400 to clear the flag and release his funds he insisted were sitting in his account the entire time, just inaccessible. He cried, he said, telling her this. He said he felt like a failure. He said he understood if she was losing patience with him, if she wanted to walk away. That was the moment, Sharon later realized, that had trapped her most effectively. Not the request for more money. The suggestion that she might leave him. Because by then, walking away didn't feel like an option. She had already told her family. She had already imagined the wedding. She had already, in her mind, remarried. Walking away wouldn't just mean losing Dennis. It would mean admitting, to herself and to everyone she'd told, that she had been wrong, that she had built a future on nothing. So she sent the $2,400. And a week later, another selfie arrived. Dennis at what appeared to be an airport gate, holding a boarding pass, grinning. He never boarded. Over the following 4 months, the excuses grew larger, and so did the amounts. A supposed shipping contract, worth millions, that Dennis's company was on the verge of losing due to a bureaucratic dispute, one that, conveniently, only Dennis could resolve, and only if he could personally cover a $6,000 release fee for equipment being held at customs in Lagos. A medical emergency, chest pains, an emergency hospital visit in a country where his insurance, tied up in the same frozen accounts, wouldn't cover treatment. $3,100 urgently. A legal fee when Dennis claimed he'd been wrongly implicated in an internal investigation related to the stolen laptop, requiring $4,000 for a lawyer to clear his name before the company would release his back pay. Pay that, he assured her, would be enough to pay her back for everything the moment it arrived. Each excuse built on the last. Each one referenced details from earlier in the story, the stolen documents, the frozen accounts, the aerospace contracts, creating a narrative so internally consistent that questioning any single piece felt, to Sharon, like questioning the entire relationship. By the 5th month, Sharon had taken a loan against her retirement account. She told the bank it was for home repairs. She told her daughter nothing at all anymore, having learned to avoid the subject entirely rather than face another worried look. She stopped tending her garden as carefully. Biscuit, her dog, began spending more afternoons alone in the yard while Sharon sat at her kitchen table, phone in hand, waiting for messages that came less and less frequently, and always at hours that made video calls impossible. She had sent, by that point, just over $13,000. There was one more payment to come, the largest of all. The final request came framed not as a crisis, but as an opportunity, the story's last, cruelest twist. Dennis explained that his years-long contract dispute had finally resolved in his favor. The company, he said, was releasing his full back pay, nearly $290,000 in accumulated salary and contract bonuses withheld during the investigation. But there was one final obstacle: an international transfer tax required by the receiving bank before funds above a certain threshold could be released, a fee Dennis's own frozen accounts still couldn't cover. $4,200. He said it apologetically, almost ashamed to ask one more time. He said the moment the transfer cleared, he would wire her back everything she had ever sent him, plus enough to cover a plane ticket for her to come to Istanbul for the transition period before they moved to Ohio together. Sharon didn't have $4,200 readily available anymore. She had already borrowed against her retirement. She had already asked her sister for a short-term loan. She was too embarrassed to explain fully. This time she sold her wedding ring, the one from her first marriage, the one she'd kept in a drawer for 3 years, unable to decide what it meant to let it go. She wired the money on a Thursday afternoon, sitting at her kitchen table, Biscuit asleep at her feet. She smiled when the confirmation screen appeared. She believed in that moment that she was finally closing the distance between herself and the life she'd been imagining for 8 months. 2 days later, the messages stopped. 4 days later, a stranger called her, a fraud investigator with her bank, and asked her to sit down. The investigator's name was Rebecca Lynn, and she worked with a fraud recovery unit that partnered with banks to trace international wire transfers connected to romance scam reports. She had been assigned to Sharon's case after the bank's automated systems flagged the pattern: 17 international transfers over 5 months, escalating in amount, all routed through intermediary accounts before reaching final destinations outside the reach of standard fraud recovery. "I need to walk you through what we found," Rebecca told her, "and I need you to know none of what happened is your fault. This was not a scam built to fool careless people. It was built specifically and deliberately to fool careful, intelligent, kind people. That's exactly what makes it effective." Sharon, sitting at her kitchen table, gripped the phone with both hands. The first layer of the truth came quickly. Dennis did not exist. The photographs used in his profile belonged to a real man, a Danish airline pilot who had no idea his face had been used, whose own social media had been scraped for images that were then run through minor editing software to create dozens of subtly different Dennis photo sets used across multiple dating platforms. The second layer took longer to explain. The money had not gone to Istanbul or Lagos or any of the cities named in Dennis's stories. It had moved through a network of mule accounts, bank accounts opened using stolen or purchased identities specifically to receive and quickly redistribute scam proceeds, before consolidating in accounts traced to Accra, Ghana. The third layer was the one that made Sharon go quiet on the phone for nearly a full minute. The operation Sharon had been communicating with for 8 months was not a single scammer, working alone, falling for his own con the way she'd sometimes imagined, torn between love and circumstance. It was an organized criminal network, one of dozens operating across coastal West Africa, employing what investigators described as romance scam call centers, compounds where dozens of operators worked in shifts, each managing multiple simultaneous relationships, using shared scripts, shared photo libraries, and shared psychological playbooks refined over years of trial and error on real victims. Some of the operators, Rebecca explained gently, were not entirely willing participants themselves, trafficking victims coerced into running scam operations under threat, a detail that complicated the story in ways Sharon hadn't been prepared for. "There is no Dennis," Rebecca said. "There never was. But there were real people typing those messages to you. And in a strange, terrible way, some of them may have been victims of this system too, forced to do this work." Sharon didn't know what to do with that information, Anger felt justified. But anger mixed with something else now. A strange, unwanted grief for people she would never meet, on the other end of a scheme that had taken everything from her and given some of them almost nothing in return. "How much did I lose?" she finally asked. Rebecca read the number slowly. $17,000, not counting the interest on the retirement loan, not counting the wedding ring she would never get back. Recovery, in cases like Sharon's, is rare. Rebecca was honest with her about that from the first phone call. The funds had moved through too many accounts, across too many borders, too quickly. A small fraction, just under $1,900, was recovered from a mule account frozen before full disbursement. The rest was gone. What took longer to rebuild wasn't the money. It was everything else. Sharon spent the first month after the call barely speaking to anyone outside her immediate family. She deleted the dating app the same day she got off the phone with Rebecca, then spent an evening scrolling through 8 months of messages before finally deleting the conversation thread entirely, watching 8 months of a relationship that never existed disappear in a single tap. Her daughter didn't say, "I told you so." Sharon would say, months later, that she almost wished she had. That the silence, the careful gentleness with which her family handled her afterward, felt in its own way like confirmation of how foolish she believed she'd been. It took nearly 4 months before Sharon could talk about what happened without her hands shaking. It took longer than that before she stopped feeling the reflexive urge every evening around 8 p.m., the hour Dennis's messages used to arrive most reliably, to check her phone for something that was never coming. What helped, eventually, was an unexpected source. A support group, run partly online, for survivors of romance scams. Sharon was startled, the first time she joined a call, by how many of the other participants sounded like her. Divorced or widowed, in their 50s or 60s, intelligent, accomplished, careful people in every other area of their lives. "I used to think only foolish people fell for things like this," one woman on the call said during Sharon's second session. "Then it happened to me, and I realized the people who design these scams aren't trying to fool foolish people. Foolish people are hard to keep paying for 8 months. They're trying to fool people who love deeply and trust easily and want, more than anything, to be needed by someone. Those aren't weaknesses. They used to be the best parts of me." Sharon has not, as of this telling, gone back to dating. She says she isn't opposed to the idea someday, but she is, for now, focused on things that feel more solid. Her garden, which she has expanded, with an entire new row of sunflowers she planted herself, for herself, this past spring. Her grandchildren, who she now sees every other weekend instead of every few months. A part-time volunteer role she took on, almost by accident, helping a local senior center run workshops on recognizing online fraud. "I don't do it because I think I can undo what happened to me," she said near the end of one interview. "I do it because if even one person in that room doesn't send that first $400 because of something I said, then something good came out of all of it." She still has the flight confirmation Dennis once sent her, the one for the flight that never happened. She kept it, she says, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder. "Not a reminder to never trust anyone again," she said. "I don't want to become someone who can't do that. It's a reminder that the version of love that comes easy and fast and always seems to need something from you right when you're most invested, that's not what love actually looks like. Real love doesn't ask you to prove it with your bank account." She paused, then added the line that, more than any other, seemed to capture where she had landed, 8 months after that final transfer, and 4 days after the call that changed everything. "I lost $17,000. That part still hurts, and it probably always will. But it wasn't the worst thing I lost that year. The worst thing was believing, for 8 months, that I'd finally found someone who saw me. Getting that feeling taken away, knowing it was never real in the first place, that's the part I'm still learning how to carry.